So I want to welcome everybody tonight to the talk about the life and history of the northern moose in Maine with photographer Bob Michelson. Very happy to have him here with us tonight again for this presentation. But let me tell you, I'm going to mute you all as you enter the call. And you may save your questions until the end of the hour, but you can also or type them into the chat box and I'll pose them to Bob at the end. But you also have the ability to unmute yourself. So you can ask something as we go along and our speaker thinks that's just fine. If there's something that he talks about that you really want to ask him while he's in the process. So I'm filming the program for Milton Access Cable, and I want to thank the Friends of the Milton Public Library for their support of my events. Now let me tell you about our speaker. His work has appeared in numerous magazines, and he's been diving for 46 years. Hold on one sec here. Okay. He's a PADI dive master, a specialty instructor in underwater photography and videography, a naturalist, and a PADI project-aware fish ID based in Walpole, Massachusetts. His company is called Photography by Michelson, and I'll put his website URL in the chat box for you. So now please enjoy the program.
Thanks, Jean. I actually prefer that if you have a question, stop me in my tracks, ask me the question while we're at the slide that's in question, so we don't forget about it later on, and we can stay on point and stay on target. So please feel free to unmute yourselves or place it in the chat, and Jean can relay it to me at any point during the program. You don't have to wait until the end. So this is a bull moose. Bull moose are the largest land mammals in North America. They are up to 8 feet tall at the shoulders and weigh upwards of 15 to 1,800 pounds. They are bigger overall than a grizzly bear in the Pacific Northwest. These are big animals. They grow an antler called a rack starting in the springtime, and by September, they have their velvet removed from the antler and they're ready to do battle to entice females to mate with them. And the rack can be over 6 feet across. And when there were wolves wild in the country, this is how a moose was able to take down a wolf with their antlers. They know how to use them. They're not afraid to use them. And they can put all 1,800 pounds behind those antlers to do harm to anybody if it gets in their way. So this is Byron. Byron is a male moose on display at the Maine Wildlife Park up in Gray, Maine. It is run by the State Fisheries and Wildlife of Maine.
It's snowing?
Oh, sorry. We can get this. Hold on. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Not a problem. I thought there was a question, but they just didn't mute themselves. So Byron is a captive raised wild animal. The Maine Wildlife Park, excuse me, takes in animals that were injured or orphaned and cannot be released back into the wild. So Byron was orphaned as a young calf. His mother got killed. So the superintendent of the park brought Byron in and became his surrogate mother. So when I went up there, they got me behind the scenes and in with Byron to photograph him. Now, when the superintendent snuggled up against the chain link fence, Byron snuggled up to him very affectionately and was eating leaves out of his hand through the fence. I then approached the fence, and he's trying to barrel through the fence to get to me because he perceived me as a threat. So imagine an 8-foot chain link fence being pushed 3 feet towards you when you're getting close to it. Very daunting. Very powerful animals. They're not afraid of anything or anybody. Here's a female called a cow. This is an older female. She was on her last year of life in this photo. Her name was Annie, also on display at the Maine Wildlife Park up in Gray, Maine. Annie was 14 years old, and she succumbed to her age. Just as tall as the male, 8 feet tall at the shoulders, a little bit smaller in weight, maybe 1,400 to 1,500 pounds. Cows are not as big as bulls. They're not as muscular. They're not quite as powerful. But when they're caring for their calves until the calves are about 6 to 8 months old, you don't want to get between a mother and her baby calf. So here's the range worldwide of moose. They're found in North America, the northernmost fringes of the United States, all of Canada, and throughout most of Europe and the top part of Asia. So they're found throughout the entire world on the northern part of the hemisphere. They are the largest land mammal in the North American continent. There are larger animals on the Asian and northern European continent. So they're not the biggest animals out there, but they're pretty close. Here's the range in the United States and Canada. In New England, we have some remnant moose that come down to the middle of our state by Fitchburg and Leominster. They'll come down to Route 2 from northern reaches of upstate New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And they'll come down as far as about Leominster and Fitchburg, and that's about as far south as they come. But if you go up to New Hampshire, the mountain region of Gorham, New Hampshire, northern Vermont, all of Maine. Maine actually has the second highest population of moose in the country, second only to Alaska. Maine has a herd numbering 60 to 75,000 animals in Maine alone. Massachusetts, we have several hundred. New Hampshire has about 4,500. But they're very elusive. You have to know where to look and be very lucky that you find them. So here is Byron is in his enclosure, looking back at the photographer saying, "What are you looking at?" Very daunting character when you're at ground level with these animals. 8 feet tall at the shoulder. Now, I'm 5'9". I'm looking up at this guy's face. But through the safety of an enclosure, I'm not in the field with him because he's a wild animal. They don't allow anybody to be in the actual physical presence of a moose in captivity because they're still wild. He is only bonded with his caretaker. Everyone else is a stranger and should be fearful of this animal. Here is Annie. I'm on top of a 6-foot fence looking down inside of her enclosure, and she was very, very docile. I never told you this, but they actually gave me an overripe banana, and I was able to feed her through the fence, and she ate it out of my hand. And when I got to the very last part of the banana, all I felt was her gentle tongue and lips on my fingers. Such a gentle giant. It was so cool. And I never told you. I'll deny it to the hilt, because I was sworn never to tell anybody that I was allowed to do that. Here is a wild cow with her calf up in Greenville, Maine, north and west of Moosehead Lake in Maine, near Quebec. It's about a 6-hour drive north of here. I went up with the Maine State moose biologist, Lee Cantor, and he took me out. We met him at 6 o'clock in the morning, and this is during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic, there were no vaccines. And where I came from Massachusetts, traveling up to Maine, I was not allowed to stay in a motel or hotel. So we left our house in Braintree at 12 o'clock midnight, arriving at Greenville at 6 o'clock in the morning, drove around with the biologist for 6 hours, and drove straight home. It was the longest day of my life. I was exhausted. I was spent, but amazing photos. This mother-calf combination was about a half a mile away from me, and I used a very powerful 750 millimeter telephoto lens on a tripod to capture these photos. I was hoping to get much closer. It just didn't happen. They could hear us from a mile away. They wouldn't get anywhere close to us. This mother led her calf in the opposite direction from where we were based, on top of a bluff looking down into a canyon. The main predator of moose in the central part of the country are gray wolves, timber wolves. Timber wolves will hunt them in family units or packs, and they'll take down and feed on an adult moose. No other predator in the country, other than a grizzly bear, can be a formidable enemy of a moose. No other animal is capable of taking down a moose, other than a grizzly bear or a pack of wolves. But if they take down a male, they have to be very, very careful of his antlers when he has his rack fully grown. By June to July, it's pretty much fully mature, and he can do a lot of damage with that rack of antlers. Here is a gray wolf eating a white-tailed deer. Not showing the gory sides of it. The belly's facing away from us, but the wolves eat every part of it. And the alpha, or the lead female wolf, the alpha wolf, eats first, and then they go down the pecking order of the hierarchy of the wolf pack. The subordinate animals eat last. The alpha always eats first. And there's also coyotes are capable of taking down a moose. If they hunt in a pack of 6 or 8 animals, they can take down a moose or a youngster. They can take down a calf or a cow and take down a moose up in North Country. This is typical moose habitat in northern New Hampshire. This is around the White Mountains region of New Hampshire, and they're found from the White Mountains points north. So if you start in Kangamangas Highway and travel north past following Route 16 north or Route 3 north on the Vermont border. You can take it up to Moose Alley, which is the final 15-20 miles in New Hampshire before you get to the Canadian border and the very top of the triangle of New Hampshire. That's where you find moose, along with near Rangeley, Maine, on the Maine side near Gorham, New Hampshire. But you have to know exactly where you're looking. You find it very early in the morning, late in the afternoon to evening. And it's much safer to just go on a sanctioned moose tour to see these animals in the wild with a guide to take you there. Here's another shot of the mother, a different female and her calf in a open valley about a half a mile from us near Greenville, Maine. Moose will make a wallow. This is a wallow that they urinate and trample down all the growth. They squat and they pee in it. They roll around in this to get their scent in the wallow to attract males and females for mating purposes. Now, how it happens is here's Byron scraping a depression in his enclosure, and then he squats and releases some urine, and then he sniffs it and he scrapes it and makes it into a bigger area, and he keeps enlarging it. If this was a swampy area like this photo, you'd end up with an actual moose wallow, a large area. All that moisture is from moose urine. It mixes in with rainwater, but it's mainly moose urine. And this is a behavior that they employ during mating season, or referred to as the rut. And the moose are in their rut from mid to late September until the middle to the end of October, and then they're done. They're done for the year. Here's Byron sniffing his beginning of a moose wallow, and then he's calling up. He has a verbal, he's calling out for a female. Now, he can smell Annie in the next enclosure. Annie was older than him. In this photo, Byron was about 10 years old. He wanted to mate, but Annie was so old that if he tried to mate with her, he would have killed her. So they kept them separated in separate chain-linked separated enclosures, but he could still smell Annie from a quarter of a mile away. So he's calling out to entice her in to mate with him, but she was too old. If he tried it, he would have killed her. Part of the mating ritual is the male will take their antlers or rack and scrape it against trees and bushes to attract other females from up to a mile away, or other males to do battle with, to gain supremacy to mate with other females that are in the area. And here I am inside the enclosure in the Gray Wildlife Park, where they have a wooden shed in the back of the enclosure with a big open door that they feed the animal, so there's no human interaction. Well, Byron tried to get his head in through that window to get to me. He's turning his head, trying to fit his antlers into the window, and I kept backing up to the furthest back in the shed I could to get these photos because he wanted to get me. He didn't like me being there. Moose have all molars for their teeth. They don't have any canine teeth like we do, like other top predators that will tear meat. They're vegetarians. These are herbivores. They eat fruits, vegetables, greenery, bark from trees. They will eat insects, but they don't eat any meat animals. They're not carnivores. They're herbivores. So they eat primarily vegetation. So they have all molars as their teeth, no canine teeth whatsoever. So they're all large and flat teeth. Here's Byron eating some vegetation in his enclosure. Here's a moose that Lee Cantor was out on Moosehead Lake doing some research. I was not with him. So Lee Cantor took this photo and provided it to us. Moose are incredibly strong swimmers. And in fact, in Moosehead Lake and other reaches in North Country, moose can dive down 15, 20 feet and grab the vegetation from the bottom of a lake or pond, come up to the surface and eat it. They're excellent swimmers and divers, and they go after the fresh, leafy milfoil and other aquatic vegetation found in the bottom of lakes and ponds. They have a hump similar to a camel that has mostly water inside of it. It serves no other purpose other than to maintain some energy for the animal to use up when there's a shortage of food. So it's a kind of a food reserve is their hump, right on top of the shoulder area. And the male has a larger hump than the female does. The eye is humongous. Here's a close-up of a bull moose's eye. It's roughly the size of a small baseball from eyelid to the bottom of the eye. It's a huge eye. These things see and walk around in pitch blackness. And with these eyes, they can see in that kind of darkness because of the size of the eye and how wide it can open in pitch blackness to be able to see and have them walk around through trees and bushes. It's amazing. Such a large animal is capable of doing such things. So here is a bull moose walking portrait style off to the right-hand side, displaying his rack, his antlers, and he has a beard coming down from under his chin. The cows do not have a beard. So two ways to recognize a bull moose when he's lost his antlers after about January, February time period is he has a large hump on top of his shoulder, larger than a female, and he has a beard underneath his chin that will stay with him for the rest of his life. This does not get shedded at all. Females do not have that. So that's how you identify a bull moose from a cow moose once the bull moose has lost his antlers. The hoof of a moose is large. They have 3 toes, 2 in the front, 1 in the back. The front, they distributing 1,800 pounds on 4 paws that are roughly the size of my hand. So if they have very, very long legs to go into marshy wetlands, and they'll sink down up to their chest area to feed on vegetation because of the sheer weight on top of their legs. This is a footprint left by a bull moose. We were about 20 feet off of a side road near Greenville, Maine, and Lee Cantor pulled off to the side and says, "Follow me into the swamp. I'm going to show you some fresh bull moose prints." I guess he estimated the bull moose was there 2 hours before we arrived, and then it disappeared into the forest before we showed up. So the bull moose is walking towards the camera. These are his front toes. Here's his back toe. So 1, 2, 3 points of contact in the bottom of a flat hoof. Here's Annie. Annie thought she was being very coy and hiding behind a tree, and I couldn't see her. So she's hiding behind this tree thinking I can't see her, not realizing there's a lot of body that's still quite visible from behind that pine tree. So she thinks I can't see her hiding behind that pine tree. And I'm snapping away, getting all kinds of cool photos of a large cow in natural habitat, and she doesn't even think I can see her. They're not the smartest animals on the planet. Here's Annie walking away while looking back at the camera, kind of being a snob, throwing her shoulder back at me, kind of going, "You can't see me, I'm hiding from you." Here's a cow moose that we saw June 2nd of 2022 after heading home after a black bear release in North Country. We were driving down from releasing 4 black bears that were raised at the Killam Bear Center in Lyme, New Hampshire, on the western side of New Hampshire, bordering Vermont and the Connecticut River. They tranquilized bears that were in a 12-acre enclosure and brought them up to the northern triangle of New Hampshire and released them into the wild. On our way back, on the right-hand side of another side road in New Hampshire, I saw this cow out in the middle of a swampy area. I hit the brakes, jumped out with my camera, and started taking pictures and got these photos of her. So here's our cow moose in the wild. A much closer shot than I was able to get up in Moosehead Lake area, Greenville, Maine. This animal is probably 200 yards away from me. Using a very powerful lens, I was able to get this close. And then she moved further and further away from me until she disappeared into the forest. Beautiful animal. Another cow and calf up in Greenville, Maine. We saw 3 mother-calf combinations and the same 6-hour tour with Lee Cantor. And each time they got wind of us, they took off into the opposite direction and right into the woods. So I got probably 400 or 500 pictures taken, and maybe 6 of them were really good because they were so far away. Even bringing them in, cropping them very tightly, this is the best I could do. This is not the best photograph I've ever taken of a moose. I consider this one to be much better. Nice and sharp, nice and clear, good detail, good color. This is not my finest work, but it's unique, so I'm keeping it in the slideshow. Here's a calf, courtesy of Lee Cantor. The aspect of this research I did not get to see is in the wintertime, they will go out into the wooded areas by helicopter, tranquilize young calves and adult cows and bull moose and tranquilize them and come down, land the helicopter, go and buy snowmobiles and half tracks and tranquilize them, put a radio collar on their necks, give the animals a complete physical and draw blood samples, fur samples for DNA analysis. They know who the lineage is for every moose in New Hampshire. They have a data sheet in Maine. They know who mom and dad is for every moose in the state of Maine. And that's over 60,000 strong. It's amazing the work and research that goes into this. So here is Lee Cantor spotting near Greenville, Maine, in an open area near the edge of a forest looking for moose. We didn't have any luck there. Here's a small wallow right in here, which is probably 50 feet in from a side road where he took me in. And sure enough, there's another bull moose print that was about an hour old. We just missed seeing this one. And one of the biological techs mimicked bull moose calls to try to entice other moose to come in because they can hear themselves calling from over a mile away. Now, we're in the middle of nowhere. We're hours from any city or town, and they're calling for moose, and we could hear a moose calling and answering him from over a mile away. One young moose ran over an area that I wasn't stationed at, and this guy saw the moose running through the field and looking at him, but he never stopped. So I didn't get a shot of him. But they were successful at calling in a male moose to think to either do battle with him, acting as a male moose, or to mate with a potential female. And they also take old antlers that have been shed by moose and scrape them against bushes and trees to mimic the sounds that Byron was making in his enclosure by scraping his antlers against a tree or a bush to bring in females to mate with him. Another cow and calf up in Greenville, Maine. And as far away as they were, I was still awestruck by the experience. And you can look how small the beard is on the female as to how big the beard was on the male. Very, very tiny tuft of hair underneath the chin, but not a really big beard that's very pronounced in the bull that we saw earlier. So here's the part I didn't get to see. The helicopter pilot, they're flying over north and central Maine, aerial surveys of moose. And in one day in January of this year, they saw over 105 moose in one day, 10 black bears, and probably a couple dozen coyotes in one day in a 3-hour flight. I was so jealous. I'm hoping to go up in them some year in a helicopter, but since the pandemic, they've been restricted to research flights and researchers only. They won't let a photographer go up with them. Even though I'm offering to donate whatever I shoot, the flights are precious to them. The air time is precious to them. They'd rather be up there with researchers doing research with this moose population. So here's in the wintertime. They've tranquilized a cow. They landed the helicopter. Trucks come in and ATVs come in from all directions. Here's a logger going down a road with the helicopter landing nearby. They come with snowmobiles. They come in with all this equipment to process a cow. So here is a calf. This moose was born in May. It's now January, so it's about 6 to 7 months old. They tranquilize it. They put it in a large sack and hang it from a crude tripod and take a weight measurement. They want to see how well mom's been doing at teaching this guy how to survive in its first winter. And they draw blood samples. They're giving it a physical. They're putting ear tags in the young calf. So in Maine, you can hunt moose. And when you do kill a moose, you're required to take those tags out and turn them into the state authority and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal authority responsible for all wildlife in the continent, in our country. Now, here's the problem with moose. Those little white specks are winter ticks. They're the size of a small grape. And the infestation of winter ticks on all the moose population is such that calves are being malnourished by becoming anemic because these ticks are drawing so much blood out of them. The babies are anemic and they die. So they're studying, they're taking measurements and counting how many ticks are in how big of an area under the armpits, under the chest, under the neck area, near the genitalia. They're everywhere. And there's so many of these winter ticks drawing blood from these baby moose that they're dying from lack of blood, from anemia.
Excuse me, Bob, but do they remove the ticks?
They don't remove the ticks. It'll do more harm to the moose than if they leave them alone.
I see.
The moose are capable of brushing up against trees to remove some of them, but not all of them.
Ah,
It's an infestation taking place primarily just in Maine right now. The other northern regions of the country that have moose don't have this problem. It's just in Maine. New Hampshire does not have this problem. I do not believe Vermont has this problem. Only Maine has this problem. And hopefully it's isolated to Maine and it stays there. They have the largest herd, so the ticks are drawn to them. They're drawn to larger numbers because there's more blood for them. So here we're back in the headquarters building. The larger collars on the right-hand side are placed on large female or cow moose, and the smaller collars in the back are put on calves that are 6 to 7 months old. And they put them around their necks. They strap them in, they bolt them in place, they rivet them in place. And the batteries on these units are good for 1 year. Then they'll fall off. They do no harm to the animal. So they put a blindfold on the moose as they're processing them. Here, a biologist is taking a blood sample. Doesn't hurt the animal at all. Here's the calf with 2 new ear tags in a radio transmitting collar in the springtime. They were able to track the animal to several miles from where they captured it in the wintertime, and it's doing rather well the following spring. And here's Byron back in his enclosure at the Maine Wildlife Park, showing his full antlers. He breaks off his antlers by March of the following spring. He still is misled to think that the rut is longer than October for him because there's no other animals for him to mate with. Since Annie passed away 2 years ago, he's the only moose in captivity. They're waiting to get another orphaned moose to raise in with him, but so far that hasn't happened. I'm hoping this spring, he's able to get a friend in with him, so he's not by himself anymore. They're social animals. They like to have company. Here's Annie, another look at her. Beautiful animal, 8 feet tall at the shoulders, roughly 1,400 pounds. That's a lot of moose. Now we'll open up the floor to any questions.
okay. So I don't see any here in the chat. Everyone's kind of quiet.
So everyone's ready for the test? There's no test, I'm kidding.
So Bob, just stop your share maybe, and we will go to the gallery here. Yeah,
Okay,
good. So I have a question,
sure.
which is, do you know about the moose in Vermont? I think her name was Jessica, or the cow was Jessica, who fell in love with a cow. They made a children's book out of it. Now I'm dating myself. This was a long time ago. But the moose came down with the cow and never left her side. And
I've read that. I've read that online. Yes.
they became a couple.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they don't mate, right, with somebody that's,
They don't mate with domestic animals,
yeah.
but they
But
became lifelong friends.
yeah, the moose was so in love with that cow.
Yeah.
It was really very, it was wonderful. It's a
She
wonderful
didn't
thing.
know anything different, so she thought the cow was a
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, and so they were together for quite some time, and then all of a sudden, after a long period, I don't even know how long it was, um, the moose left, and
Well, the moose might have passed away because they only live to be 12 to 14 years old in the wild.
is that right? Oh,
Yeah, they have a
how
relatively short lifespan. So
how
Annie was 14 when she passed away, and the only reason she lived that long is because she was raised in captivity. She didn't have to search for food or use a lot of energy to survive. She was well taken care of by the superintendent of the park.
yeah,
He was her surrogate
so
father.
how's the longest they might live in captivity? Do you
About
think
14 years. In the
14,
wild, it's about 10 to 12 years.
10 to
So they
12?
don't live. They're a big animal. It takes a lot to keep them going for 12 years.
Now, so people hunt them and they eat moose?
Moose meat is a delicacy like venison is from deer meat.
Hmm.
And you have to pay decent money and have a special set of hunting skills to be able to land one of these animals.
Well, yeah, you don't want to anger them and then they charge you. So yeah, Harriet had a question and it was about average lifespan in the wild. All right, so all you moose lovers, do we have any other questions for Bob about this subject? It's very interesting. I told you my brother-in-law saw one on the back road in Vermont. I had to slam the brakes on. It was like these big hairy legs, and then he just ran off down in the woods. The
Your
moose.
brother-in-law was very lucky he didn't come through the windshield.
I know, but right
That's
before that, a wild turkey hit the windshield. So it
well,
was like,
you can survive a wild turkey striking your windshield, but if a moose comes through your windshield, you're getting 1,800 pounds of flesh in your face
oh my gosh.
because they're so tall. You don't take a deer. If you hit a deer, you're hitting it in the chest area. If you hit a moose, you're taking its legs out, and the whole body's going to come through your windshield.
Oh
You're not going to
heavens.
survive.
Oh my gosh.
There's
And
a high
then,
mortality rate with humans when they have car strikes with moose.
oh, I bet. Yeah.
People don't survive.
Well, growing up in Vermont, I heard a lot of different stories about people hitting deer or deers, running in front of the car. And actually my sister, um, two deer ran in front of the car and she smashed her car, but she didn't hit them. So, but there lots of stories growing up I've
We
heard
had a friend of
of
ours.
deer.
They lived up in Billerica on the North Shore near Lowell and Chelmsford, and she hit a deer and it totaled her SUV.
Oh, I believe it.
Deer didn't survive. Thankfully, she was okay, but it totaled her SUV.
Oh,
She
wow.
had to get in the car, and that's a
Yeah.
deer that only weighs 250 pounds, not an 1,800-pound beast.
Wow. Okay, so Harriet asks, how fast can they move?
A bull moose and a cow moose can run upwards of over 20 miles an hour. You're not going to outrun a moose.
You're not going to outrun a moose.
Not going to outrun a moose. A strong athlete can run maybe 8 miles an hour.
So what causes them to charge you?
If
Me-
you see a mother and her calf and you get between the mother and her calf, the mother will go at you because she perceives you as a threat to her baby.
Okay.
Similar to when I had a little girl, she's now 34 and married, but when I had a little girl, no one came near my kid, not without permission.
I know, that's like with my son.
We're very protective parents, and no one's going to touch my kid. And
Yeah.
even when she started dating, it's like we had a protective father society when she was in school. It drove her crazy.
Okay, so now Nancy says, fascinating. I never realized how large the moose population is in Maine. And
Mhm.
I didn't either. You said it was 75,000 of them,
60 to 75,000 is estimates right now.
but they're hard to see. You can't like really,
They like the deep, heavy forests of Maine. They don't like people, which is good for the moose. And you have to go out in very rough terrain to find them. And it's a chance encounter if you don't know exactly where to look. So when I go out with moose, I go out with either the state biologist or we go on a sanctioned moose tour. And we're talking about possibly this fall going out on an ATV tour. You rent an ATV and they take you out on tour near the side of the different lakes that have the moose and you see moose.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking of doing that this later this fall.
So your job is to document what the researchers are doing to save the moose.
I am a documentarian. My job is to tell the story of the research, the management of the species, and the animal's life history. And it's fascinating for me because I get to hang around with smart people all the time.
Right.
And I learned so much from very highly qualified PhDs, well published PhDs, and I get to learn from them. It's a private education. It's I'm very blessed.
Yeah, it's very
I get to
interesting.
hang around with super smart people, and none of these people have an attitude.
Well,
So
that's great. They were glad
I'm
you're
gonna
there.
I'm gonna take a sidestep with what's going on right now with our federal government. I'm furious. A lot of very hard, dedicated people are being fired for no reason whatsoever.
Very
They're
well
cutting
trained
they're,
people. Yeah, very
they're
well
cutting out
educated.
they're cutting out biologists from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, from the Environmental Protection Agency, from NOAA, all these branches that we rely on for our safety, and they're just being fired for no reason. I'm
Yes,
furious.
and you work a lot with
I work with
ocean
I work with all these
animals too.
people that are
Yeah.
being fired. I
Ah,
feel so bad for them.
that's awful. And I think it's putting the public so much at risk, so much
Start
many
with
of
the
these.
executive branch if you want to thin things out. Start with the executive branch. Get rid of
Yeah.
those people.
Ah. Okay, now oh Harriet says the same. She says me too. Yeah, I
Okay.
totally agree with you. So Bob, how is climate change affecting the moose? I mean, the warming
It's
climate.
allowing the winter ticks to spread more quickly
Hmm.
and through a broader portion of the population. In extremely cold winters, the deer ticks become dormant. They've had mild winters up there. The deer ticks are spreading everywhere.
And
So
they mostly infest the young ones.
they'll
Or
go
did,
after the adult. Affect the adults as well. But the adults, because of their sheer size, can survive being having blood drawn by ticks.
oh, I see. So they
Calf,
all
a
affected.
calf that's starting to grow and mature doesn't have the energy to have the lifeblood drawn from it.
Right, right.
It's like when we go to the doctors and you give blood, they take few small vials, and if they take a lot, you feel like a little bit funny. Imagine
Mhm.
if they took a gallon out of you, you'd need to lay down and have some fluids and have some food to
Yeah, and rest,
bring
yeah,
yourself back.
yeah.
So an 1,800 pound moose can take having winter ticks draw blood from them. A couple 100 pound baby can't handle it, and they become anemic and they die from it.
So is the population every year becoming less because in Maine because of this?
Population is stable. The population is stable. If anything, the population should be growing, but it's not really growing.
Because of this.
Yeah, the state also has a controlled hunt. They give so many permits per year, depending upon what the Creel survey shows from the previous year, how many moose are left in the state. And they'll issue so many permits to thin out the herd by a specific percentage, and then the permits are stopped.
Hmm.
So they may only give 750 permits out to kill a moose, and you can only kill a bull moose or a cow moose, but you can't touch the calf.
So is moose hunting season the same time as their mating?
No,
Because usually hunting's in the fall,
hunting's in
right?
the fall, and there's different seasons depending upon what state you live in. Every state determines that. So
Yeah,
Montana has a different hunting season than Maine, than New Hampshire, than Vermont. Every state has their own rules and regulations as to what time of year you can hunt with what method. Now, people hunt with black powder, people hunt with rifles, weapons, people hunt with bow and arrow and crossbows.
right. There's a bow and arrow
So
season, right?
the states control the hunting methodology and the time of year. And what time of year can you hunt with what method?
With
So
what? Oh, no.
with what method? So you can hunt certain times of year with black powder. You can hunt certain times of year with a rifled weapon or a shotgun. You can hunt certain times of year with bow and arrow, and that's controlled by each state.
I never heard of black powder. In Vermont, it's in the
Muskets,
fall. It's in the
muskets.
muskets, yeah. In the fall, because I know my brother-in-law and his grandson would go bow and arrow hunting.
Mhm.
But that was for deer. That wasn't because we don't really have that many. I mean, we have moose, but he never caught a moose. Um, but I didn't know anything about this musket thing. That's
Yeah,
musket.
people can hunt with muskets, black powder weapons, which is a musket. That's coming back actually.
Hmm.
People are going back to frontier days,
Yeah, I was gonna
1700s
say
from
that
the
a musket.
1800s.
Right, right. Huh. Interesting.
Muskets are extremely loud. Black powder is extremely loud. So you get one shot and then that animal's gone.
Yeah. I would
By the
guess
time you reload,
you've never been a
by
hunter,
the
I
time you
bet.
reload, that animal's long gone.
Yeah, yeah,
There's no double-barreled muskets.
yeah, interesting. All right, now everybody, does anybody have any questions about the moose? Has anybody seen a moose? Have anybody been up in Maine or in the country and seen a moose? No, they're
You can
all
see them in
very,
northern New Hampshire. There's moose.
they're
Northern
very,
Vermont, there's moose.
they're very quiet,
If
Bob.
you go to Grand Teton or um, any national park in the central western part of the country, there's moose everywhere. Alaska has the largest herd of moose in the country.
Okay, so Harriet says, yes, in Alaska, she saw a moose. Oh, and you were in Denali, Denali. Oh, when was that, Harriet? You can always unmute yourself and talk to us. We'd love
I
that.
join the conversation.
Yeah, join the conversation. That'd be great. Um,
Oh, that was many years ago on a trip with the Smithsonian. We went, it was light out very late in the evening. And so we went out one evening It was probably around 10 o'clock to, um, there was a water source and the moose was in the water, sticking its head down and eating what you described. It was probably foraging for the greenery
Yeah,
below.
aquatic
And
vegetation.
yeah, it was quite a sight. It was special.
I
You get any
bet.
pictures or video of it?
I did not.
Oh,
I know.
I
Uh,
I thought it was interesting how they are such good swimmers. I didn't know that.
yeah, they're very strong swimmers. I
Yes.
saw one probably 30 years ago swimming across Squam Lake in New Hampshire.
Hmm.
And I was so awestruck, I didn't even pick my camera up. I was just like, oh my God, look at this. Instead of picking up the camera and taking a picture, no, I'm just kind of like,
Yeah,
wow.
that's something,
And the
huh?
camera's hanging down in front of my neck, and I didn't pick it up.
And they have a pretty good constitution, so they can keep at it for a long time swimming, right? They
They
don't
have
get
they don't get
tired.
tired as quickly as we do.
Yeah, that's it. Now, what about other like big animals? Like, what about deer? Are they good swimmers?
Deer are good swimmers as well, yes.
So that type of animal, they're good swimmers.
Well,
What about bears?
there's two species of deer in the Northeast. We have white-tailed deer and we have moose. There are elk, which is a third species of deer, but there's no elk in New England. You have to go to Pennsylvania or upstate New York to see elk. And then the Midwest and the Great Plains have elk herds still, but there's no elk in New England. Other than if you go to the Southwick Zoo in Mendon, they have a captive herd of elk in a 20-acre enclosure, no, 50-acre enclosure. That they're wild elk. They give birth every spring. It's really cool to go on a train ride through that habitat.
So now, what's the difference between moose and elk?
Um, about twice the size. Moose are twice the size of elk. A
Oh,
large
oh.
bull elk probably comes close to 800 to 1,000 pounds,
Hmm.
and his antlers much more ornate than a moose is. But beef wise, he's not nearly as big as a bull moose. And the cows are much thinner. They look like a small horse.
Hmm. You know, my husband and I like to go up to Canada to Park Omega, which is a wild animal park that you drive through. It's not too far from the capital, Ontario. It's in Ontario. So, no, I'm sorry. It's in what's it called?
Quebec?
Uh, he's here on the call. He'll remind me. But you can drive through and see all these animals. Some of them are in enclosures, but there's lots of deer. There's lots of um, all kinds of like different, so like really small ones and big ones. And then they have elk. They have bison. Um, uh, they have one moose, at least one moose. Bears. There's a bear enclosure, like the Bear Valley is called or something. They have white foxes, um,
Oh,
uh,
Arctic fox.
Arctic foxes, white, yeah, white wolves. It's fascinating. Yeah, thank you, Craig. Park Omega in Quebec. It's in Quebec. Sorry, it's in Quebec.
Okay.
Park Omega. It's beautiful, and the town there is called Montebello. I would recommend it to anyone. We've got my sister and brother-in-law go there in the winter as well and drive. You drive through in your car and you bring like a whole bunch of carrots and feed them through the window. So all the deer come and they stick their noses in and drool all over you and get the
Could
carrots.
could I impose upon you to send all of us an email with a name and address to that place?
Oh, sure. I will
That'd be
do that.
great.
I will do that. Yeah, actually I can. It's really wonderful. And Montebello also has a beautiful old hotel, which is right on the river, huge river. And a lot of boats come in there and dock, and you can go and stay in the hotel. It's a little pricey, but it's beautiful. And there's some other French historic sites there you can visit, and you can walk all along the river on these paths. It's really a great place. Uh,
I'd be more than happy to send any friends to our neighbors to the north. They deserve it.
yes. And so now with the moose, Bob, how many moose are in Canada? There must be
I have no
tons.
clue. I have no
Yeah,
clue. You're
yeah,
all over every province in Canada. So they
yeah.
have a very robust population of moose throughout the country. I have no idea what the number is up there. It's
So
hard enough to keep track of it in this country.
yeah, that's very interesting. So in this place in Park Omega, in Montebello, They have a whole walk that you can go through, and there are 12 different Native Canadian tribes that have their totem poles and the tradition, and it talks about, how their spiritual beliefs and so forth in Canada. It's really, and you go and walk around, it's around a lake. It's really beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. We've gone there several times. It's really fun. I really
I have
recommend
to
it,
check it out.
for kids too. So, all right. Do we have any more? Oh, I think Harriet has some more message for us. Let's see here. If I can pull this down. Harriet, do you have any more things you want to share about your moose experience? She's there.
No, not really, other than it was very magical. I still have it in my mind's eye. I can remember it that well. So I encourage anybody, if you get a chance to go on a moose, you know, watch
Sure.
or trip, to do it because it's special. Thank you very much. Yep, very
Yeah.
good.
Thank you very much for being here, everybody. And Bob, I think we're good. If you think of anything later and you want any more info, because he's quite the expert on this topic.
Do we want to tease them about what's coming up in May?
Oh, yes, I do. In fact, I put it in the chat, Bob. So I'd love to see some of you back with us. Let's see here. I've signed Bob up to do a talk Tuesday, May 6th at 7 p.m. It's via Zoom, and it's called Restoring Bird Island, a Turin colony in Buzzards Bay
Turin
on
colony.
Cape Cod, Turin. Just tell them about that talk, Bob.
We have two species of tern that nest in large numbers. The federally endangered roseate tern. It's the largest population in North America. It's right off of our coast in the middle of Buzzards Bay. That island was overwashed by Hurricane Carol in the 50s and then Hurricane Bob in the early 90s. And the state decided to build up that island so it couldn't be overwashed by storms anymore. So they brought in barge loads of material and raised the level of the island up by about 5 or 6 feet. So if a hurricane comes through again, it's not going to wipe the tern colony off the island. And I have before and after photos to show the restoration. I have the entire biology of both species of terns. I got to go out on that island twice in 30 years. It's a fascinating place. It's off limits during mating season, so you can't go out on the island while you're nesting, but before and after nesting season is over. So this time of year, if you can get out on a boat in March, good luck to you. Or after August, you can go out to the island and check it out. But during mating season, it's roped off. You cannot get on the island because if you alter the behavior of a federally endangered animal, you can go to jail. So you
Well,
don't
I
want to
think
mess around.
that will be an interesting talk. Let me see. I think we have one more couple messages here. Oh, here you. Does he ever do presentations on foxes? I can answer to that because we had the presentation that Bob did about foxes, and it was very interesting. And Bob, are you going to be giving that one again? Well, I recorded it, Harriet, and I could send you how to view it at Milton Access Cable if you like. Would you like me to do that? I think she's still here. Yeah. Oh, missed it. Sorry. Yes. Okay. I will send that to you. And the thing I learned from that, the most important thing I learned from that fox talk, Bob, is that when they pounce on their prey, they jump way up and come down on top of it. And we watched this lady in Milton sent a video of that fox doing exactly that in her backyard. Remember, Bob?
Yeah, it was
You
cool.
guys sent you that. Was very cool.
It was
All
very
right.
cool.
Great. Well, listen, I'm very glad to have you all here. And I guess I'll see you next time. So thanks for coming and keep an eye on our listings and we'll try to continue having some animal talks because I find these really fascinating. Thank you, Bob, very much. It's very
My
interesting.
pleasure. Good to see you all again. Take care now.
Take care.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.